Hello and welcome back to Elden Ring. Today I want to talk about dungeons, and when I say dungeons, I'm not talking about the big legacy dungeons like Stormvale Castle or Leyndell. I'm talking about the mini dungeons, the caves for example in this game. There are 4 different types of dungeons that I want to talk about, or that I consider the dungeons, and these are the following. We have caves that have this symbol over here. We have catacombs with this symbol over here. Then we have hero graves, which look exactly like the catacombs, just with the gray statue on the right side. And then we have tunnels. Everything else I don't consider a dungeon, even though you might argue that things like forts or castles could potentially count as a game dungeon. But for the sakes of this video, I'm not considering them a dungeon. So all of these 4 different types of dungeons have their own identity. Caves, for example, are made out of natural structures. There are most of the time animals inside of them. You can find a lot of natural resources and stuff, and they don't look man-made. And now let's compare that to the other ones that are basically all man-made. The tunnels are literal mining tunnels, so most of the time you find miners inside of them that are mining away actively. You can find upgrade materials inside of them, and you need them for specific bell bearings, at least most of them. Then in catacombs, these are of course man-made structures as well, and you will find a lot of undead inside of them. A lot of these, I think they're called ghost gloveworts or something, or just gloveworts, the flowers that you can upgrade your spirit summons with. And hero graves are the biggest and most complex structures or dungeon structures in these games, and they're heavily trapped, and catacombs can be trapped as well, but in the hero graves there are chariots that are patrolling, basically like these mechanical constructs roaming around trying to flatten you and stuff like these. So every one of these different structures, they all have their own identity, really. So, by the way, do you know how many there are in the game? I've counted them, and I might be wrong there. I might have miscounted them, but I counted like 52 different dungeons. 20 caves, 18 catacombs, 9 tunnels, and 5 hero graves. And that's quite a lot. Not gonna lie, that's a lot. And they're all scattered across the lands between over here. No area is safe. So let's talk about why they even exist. And I don't mean that in a negative way, like, why do they even exist? They're so bad. No, I mean, why do they exist? Why would you want dungeons in your open world game? Well, first of all, they are presenting storytelling opportunities, right? You can put more lore in your dungeons. Very simple. Also, they're filling the voids in between areas that have, like, something to say. For example, we just come out of the graveyard, the Strand graveyard over here, and then arguably this is not a good example because this area is quite packed with content, but if we have a look at Liurnia, for example, this strip here is basically empty. Like, there's not much content, and I'm using content very lightly here. There's not much density, like action density, for example, in this area, and a dungeon here and there fills this void, right? You usually in this area there's not really much to do here, but now you have a dungeon to explore. They are also there to lengthen the game. Imagine Elden Ring without a single dungeon. Still would be a great game, but it would feel even more empty, right? And of course, it's there to distribute items. Like, for example, the tunnels again. In tunnels you can find upgrade materials, so if you find yourself lacking upgrade materials, maybe your weapons aren't hitting as hard as you think they should. Maybe you want to explore a tunnel and then upgrade your desired weapon even further, right? Things like these. Of course, they're great for taking a break from your adventures, like from major important sites like the academy, for example. Maybe you don't want to go there. Maybe you don't want to do this area quite yet because you don't feel ready, or another reason. Maybe you want to tackle some dungeons and gear yourself up, right? Maybe you want to level up and farm some places. I don't know. Many different reasons. And right now I'm talking about the first playthrough, basically, so if you already know the game, then there are better farm spots than random ass dungeons, so keep that in mind. So why do I want to talk about this? Because I think the dungeons in Elden Ring have some problems. I'm even calling this video the problems with dungeons, right? So there must be something wrong with them, and I'm not meaning like they're totally unplayable, but I think you will know what I'm saying here. So what problems do I have with the dungeons? First of all, as I said, there are like 52 of them. So I understand that some of these problems that I will address are very hard to fix from a developer standpoint. But most of them feel very generic. They have a similar or the same feel. Like if you've seen one catacomb dungeon, then it feels like you've seen all of them, especially if you're in the late game and you're like, the game already takes a long time to play through, especially when you're on your first playthrough. You want to see as much as possible, right? And then maybe you are in the late game, right? And you want to see where the plot is leading you, right? But you also want to do everything, and maybe you have the fear that when you're not doing every single dungeon, when you find them, then maybe at some point in the story you can no longer do them, or it's pointless or something like this, right? So you're doing them directly when you see them. And then it keeps dragging on, right? Like another dungeon. Oh man, I don't want to do this dungeon yet, but I basically have to, otherwise I'm missing something, right? And then when you're through the dungeon, okay, why did I do this? It feels boring, right? They have the same feel, they have the same look. The enemies and bosses in them are nothing special. Bosses in particular are just, for the most part, just regular enemies with more HP, and sometimes not even more HP, but, well. And it's getting annoying. It's more like an annoyance, especially in the late game, for me. If you love every single dungeon in the game, that's fine, but there are a few dungeons that, well, I absolutely don't like. Of course, there are good dungeons and memorable dungeons as well, but not all of them. For example, Celia Crystal Tunnel. Does it ring a bell? I think it does. For example, when you go into the Dragonburned Ruins and you open that one chest, and all of a sudden, instead of getting an item, you are being transported to a very far area on the map. You don't even Like, your map, if you have a look at the map, it's like this big maybe. And then all of a sudden, when you go, or when you are being trapped by the trapped chest, all of a sudden the map gets bigger and you're on a spot very far away from, well, your original spot. These are some memories that are very cool, to be honest. Like, I really love these surprises, and then you're all of a sudden in this environment that you're not familiar with, and the enemies inside are extremely tough and tanky and have these very crazy looking attacks and all of that, like, and you can't even get out of there, right? You have to survive, and otherwise you're doomed. You have to repeat the same thing all over again, or you have to go the right path, or you're just stuck, you will die all over again. And these are some moments that, these are the golden moments in these games, right? Like, and these are the moments why someone, or why I would say I would love to forget everything about this game and play it again, play through it again for the first time ever. Like, if I could erase my memories of this game, I would do this, to be honest, like. And maybe after I've played through it, then I regain all my memories, because, well, there's still a lot of work concerned in this, right? But now I've spoken about some problems, right? There are many dungeons. Like, they feel too generic, they feel and look like the same. It's all catacombs look like every single catacomb, for example. Hero graves are the weird kind of mix, like, it's a puzzle, but it's not a pleasant puzzle all of the time. Like, hero graves, I feel like, are, the idea behind them is very cool. It's a unique idea, it's heavily trapped, and you have to go through this gauntlet of traps, right? But especially one hero grave where you have to, I can't remember, flip this golden seal on the ground so that it teleports the chariots around so they run into each other. Some of these things are just, like, when I saw this the first time, I was completely confused why this was happening and all of that. Only at my second playthrough I noticed what was happening there, so could be clearer. But the overarching question is how could they improve the player experience? This is the overarching question, right? How do you improve dungeons? Because you have these dungeons and you have the spots for them, so how could we make them better? Or maybe if you're doing a game and you want to know how to make good dungeons, then why not listening now? Why aren't you listening right now, right? So, first of all, let's make the dungeons more unique. What do I mean by that? I mean, more unique, okay. I want to have more unique dungeons. Make them look different. Like, not every catacomb should look like every catacomb, right? There are different spots in the world. Make them look different. Maybe use different stones, maybe use different architecture, stuff like these. Of course, only if it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, I guess you're forced to use the same architecture and stuff like this. But I bet you could come up with a reason for why it should look different. And then don't build it with the same architecture in mind. Like, every catacomb, for example, is like, go through the level, pull the lever to open the door, and then beat the boss. And, well, except one technically, but I'm not counting this. Exceptions exist, but not many exceptions, sadly. So make them look different. Then, of course, exaggerate. What do I mean by exaggerate? again, back to the Celia Crystal Tunnel. If you remember your first time getting trapped there, if you ever got trapped there, let's just imagine you got trapped to the and sent to the Celia Crystal Tunnel. Then the first time you've seen Caelid, you are in the cave, you found the grace, you went outside and you see these alien-looking plants in the background and everything is red. Make it like this. This was for me one of these holy shit, where am I moments, right? On these, I was all of a sudden on this totally alien looking area, or in this totally alien looking area. So build these what the fuck moments in your dungeons, right? Make them look bigger, more fancy, more... well, more... I'm missing words here. Make them more interesting to look at, right? Then, of course, create more memorable encounters and situations. Even, what do I mean by that? Well, like the Celia Crystal Tunnel again. I really like this example because the Crystal Tunnel really left an impression on me, and this is good. You want that, right? If you're playing through a game, if you have a journey through the game, you wanna... or not even a game, if you're doing something in real life, like if you're traveling somewhere, you want to find these moments that are just, that you can remember, you can remember them and then think, man, that was awesome. Or terrifying, in games, for example, terrifying. I don't wish you terrifying encounters in real life. But in games, sure. Make them memorable encounters and situations. Then the most obvious part, maybe create more monster designs or more enemy designs in total, especially the bosses. The bosses in this game, or in this game's dungeons, they're just terrible. They're regular enemies with regular movesets, and if you have to use the same enemy all over again, right? If you have to use the ulcerated tree spirit, or what it's called, for the 20,000 different word there, for the 20th time, give them a unique look, maybe give them a reskin, give them more interesting moves, maybe resize them, make them smaller, make them bigger, something like this, right? Something that, and that's what I mean. That's what I mean. I'm getting, like, I get it, you can't do everything, like, for example, in Elden Ring now, right? If they really created for every single dungeon a unique boss, for example, then, like, where are your priorities? This is not the main game, quote-unquote. It's not the quote-unquote main game, right? Why would you spend so much resources in this very minor, quote-unquote, minor place of the game? Because compared, like, let's go, like a coastal cave or a Stormfoot catacombs, these dungeons are not as important as a Stormvale castle. So you want to put your resources, manpower and time into Stormvale castle rather than in your Stormfoot catacombs. I get it, but... and I'm talking here hypothetical, right? I don't want them to do all of these things. That's just not possible, but I still like to talk about them. And then, of course, a very simple thing would be to create better entrances. More memorable entrances, and yes, I mean the entrance. For example, catacombs, almost all of them have these wooden doors that you can push open. looks rather boring, right? Like, if you see the two doors, you already know, oh, it's just another catacomb dungeon thingy. And you know roughly what to expect. Imps and undead and maybe more constructs like these, right? A few traps here and there, like the flamethrower traps, stuff like these. Why not make the entrance more interesting looking, cool looking? Give them a cool exterior design. Maybe put more small items, like in the scene right now here with the campfire and all, something like this. Put them in there. Then that was my point with make dungeons more unique, and also integrate them more into the world. Integrate the dungeons more into the world. What do I mean by that? Well, a good example for this would be the coastal cave. The coastal cave, I feel like, is very well integrated into the world, because it's not only a dungeon, but you can go through the coastal cave and you emerge on this island over here, thus creating a bridge or underpass to a otherwise inaccessible area, which is just amazing. Like, this is a great idea. And why not make them, for example, if there is a hole in the cave I'm in, right? In the ceiling there's a hole and sunlight is shining through. We have a few scenes like these, especially in the underground, like in the underground area, like Siofra River, for example. There are a few spots like these, but then I also want, when I'm at this spot in the overworld, I want to see the hole, and maybe I could enter the cave or the dungeon via this hole, or maybe I just die when I try and jump down there. Something like this, right? So integrate them more into the world, because right now they feel very, what's the word? Isolated, I think is a good word, right? They feel like you're going through this level and then there's a dungeon and it's just this one dungeon, like just this cave. There's no... The only thing that connects the dungeon to the overworld is the entrance. Nothing more, nothing less. Which is a bit... like, you could integrate them more into the world like these. And maybe you create dungeons that have multiple entrances. There is a good example in... what it's called? Like, in the Altus Plateau, or on the Altus Plateau, I think. There are two dungeons. I think it's the Altus Tunnel and I guess the Perfumer's Grotto. Maybe, correct me if I'm wrong. But these two dungeons in the middle, where these two dungeons are meeting each other, and this could be completely... where they meet each other, there is one of these Astel creatures hanging from the ceiling, and in between these two, like where these dungeons meet, where they meet each other, there is this big ass chasm in between, so you can't go from the Altus Tunnel to the Perfumer's Grotto. But why not? Why not create a path in between them? Maybe a bigger system in between them. And maybe to get to a boss, you need to go through 3 different entrances, like, and for example, switch 3 different levers to, I don't know, to unleash the boss, and then you have to fight them in the middle of the arena or something like this. I don't know. Things like these, like connect them to each other, connect them more to the overworld. If the tunnel collapsed, I can enter the other side, like I take the normal entrance to the dungeon, but then I see this collapsed pile of stone, like the collapsed tunnel, and I can't get to the item on the other side. Then I have to maybe jump in from the overworld on this specific spot here. things like these make more connections to the overworld. A good idea for that, right, would be, for example, in Stormwell Castle, at the location where deep down into the in Stormwell Castle there is this head of the Prince of Death, right? Why not integrate a Deathblight themed dungeon alongside of this area? Maybe somehow this head retreats, or I don't know, and then this dungeon is open, like the burrowing tunnel of the roots, for example. Stuff like these make them more themed to specific aspects of the world. And of course, this was the idea with integrating. Now let's go to the last idea I have, like build quest lines around dungeons or integrate NPCs to certain dungeons. For example, this is already in the game, just not as much as I hoped it would be, because here in Liurnia we have the Black Knife Catacombs, where you actually are being sent to by Fia, if you are following her questline, the questline of Dee, Fia, and Roger, the Prince of Death questline, basically. And when you encounter the hidden boss inside of this dungeon, then you can summon Dee for that boss fight, which is amazing. Because usually dungeons are like, you have your main content and your storylines on the overworld, and then when it comes to dungeons, it's like a separate kind of area which is not connected, right? So maybe there is a NPC that likes to delve into dungeons and you meet them from time to time, and maybe then you have this crazy big dungeon, like almost like the underground, but maybe not as big and as open as the underground, where you're meeting this character. And I've talked about this dungeon that has 3 entrances, and when you enter the dungeon through all of them and you switch the levers, then you're fighting this boss. Maybe there's this NPC and he's helping you, or he's your enemy and he wants to get the treasure before you and stuff like these, right? Integrate NPCs into your quest lines, into your dungeons, which makes it feel more alive, right? And Bloodborne, for example, which is basically the what's it called? Precursor? Is that a good word? Like, what I mean by that? Like, Bloodborne started, or the thing with the dungeons. And Bloodborne, these were chalice dungeons where you had to literally obtain a chalice, and in your hub area, in your round table hold, basically you had to perform this ritual, which is just like gather resources and click OK. The ritual, by the way, that would teleport you to different dungeons, and these are completely separate from the main area, and you could play through the game just fine without entering a single dungeon. And of course you can do the same with this game, but at least in this game you have a physical path leading into these or to the entrances of the dungeon. Like, they're at least somewhat connected. But in Elden Ring, not in Elden Ring, in Bloodborne, they started the whole dungeon thing. They had procedurally generated dungeons, which is like, okay, I guess it was a fun experience. But what Bloodborne did better than this game, they had unique bosses for the chalice dungeons, which is sadly not the case over here. Maybe, no, that's not true. We have the, what's it called, the completely black monster with the parasitic insect on the head, like the graveyard shade or something like this. Like, the shade thingy, which is an awesome enemy design, by the way, like very creepy, but I wish there were more of these unique encounters in the dungeons, right? And maybe more, maybe cooler items even, like that could be connected to the dungeon near quest line, the, I don't know, the League of the Dungeon Delvers or something like this. I don't know. Something like these, but these are my thoughts and my ideas to the quote-unquote problems with dungeons. Let me know what you think about these ideas. Maybe you have your own ideas, maybe you want to share them. And that's it from me. Goodbye.